This is Block 7, The Greatest Generation, Section 5, The Home Front, with the section beginning Women in World War II. Probably for no group of American citizens did the war change as much as it did for American women. American women, as we have seen, underwent this profound cultural shift during the 1920s. The Depression kind of pushed, women's issues and women changing roles kind of to the back burner for a long time. But during the Second World War, with so many men in the army and the factories needing manpower or woman power, over 6 million women took jobs outside the home. Now, lots of women had begun working outside the home in the 1920s, but they were largely in jobs that were traditionally considered, women's work, secretary work, teaching, service industries. Now women are working in these giant, big, noisy, dirty, dangerous American factories. Rosie the Riveter became a national icon. We're going to have a look at her in a few minutes. And the government played a role supporting this, setting up 3,000 daycare centers for the children of the women who were working. Posters and film shorts celebrated the new role of women. And women kind of enjoyed their sense of playing a role, playing a part, supporting their men at the front, whether it was their husbands or their brothers or their sons. They took great pride in working to keep them equipped and keep them supplied. Now, do not get the imagination that most American women trooped off to factories during the Second World War. The truth was most American women remained at home, and even for the women who were working in factories, it was completely understood that once the war was over, they would return home. The idea that the men would return home from the war and go themselves into the kitchen was ridiculous to most Americans. And that's pretty much what happened. When the war ended, men came home, they took up their factory jobs, and for the most part, women returned to hearth and home as they traditionally had. However, the experience of World War II and the freedom and independence and self-confidence that women got would start the massive cultural changes that would take place in relationships between the genders in the second half of the 20th century. That by the 1950s, which is usually seen as this traditional decade, millions of women are leaving home to work, and the 1960s are going to see even larger changes from that point on. It was not just in industry that women were involved in the work in the war effort. WWII, WAVES, and SPARS are acronyms for women that were actually in the military. Over almost 250,000 women volunteered to serve their country in the armed services. WWICs were were women in the Army, WAVES were women in the Navy, and SPARS were women in the Coast Guard. They did not serve in combat, served mostly in clerical work, typing and making sure orders were transmitted the proper way, bookkeeping, record keeping, etc., etc. But they certainly filled jobs to free men up to be the tip of the spear, as they say, to actually do the fighting. Not all of them did this clerical work. There was women in the aviation community flying training planes and transport planes and kind of taxi service planes. The JAG Corps, which is the lawyers in the Army. There was thousands upon thousands of Army and Navy nurses, many of whom were literally a godsend to these lonely young men in far-flung places. If you read the literature of the Second World War, the diaries of the soldiers, very often, a nurse was, the closest a young man, a boy even would get to, enjoying the company of a girl for many months at a time. Women served also as doctors during the Second World War. Women served in communications, women served in intelligence. So women played this very large role in the armed services. It was the actual army. They were full service members. They had military training. They were subject to military discipline. They got military pay, equal pay. A lieutenant a WWIC lieutenant got the same amount of money as a lieutenant in the United States Army. They were promoted, according to their service, and were discharged honorably or dishonorably based on their performance. This is another major thing, like working in the factory, that gives women this sense of independence and possibility that their roles in society can be greater than what they hitherto might have imagined. Here's Rosie the Riveter. She became kind of the national icon of these women in the workforce, these working women of the United States of America. And let's have a good look at her. It's a very interesting poster here. She's obviously wearing work clothing. She's wearing, blue overalls. She's got this gigantic riveter. It's an air-powered riveter, across her lap. She is stepping on a copy of Mein Kampf, Hitler's book. She looks supremely confident. She is not decked out in traditional women's wear. She's dirty. She's got her hair tied back. She looks like she does not care one bit about what people think of her. And have a look at her physically also. This is no shrinking violet. This is no, little stick-thin breaker-in-half woman. This is a woman who you probably wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley at night because she could kick your ass. She is serious, but she is still definitely feminine. Her facial features definitely say she is definitely a woman, and she is a woman of strength, she is a woman of power, and she is a woman that's going to do a job that needs doing. And she became this national icon. This was one of the most famous posters of World War II, as was this one. I'm sure you've all seen this one, this We Can Do It poster, again celebrating women working in factories. She is definitely showing her attributes of strength, but also her attributes of femininity as well. And women identified with, American women identified with these posters and with these creations, and the confidence that they got would translate big time into the post-war world when women are going to fight for equality of all different sorts with American men.